It's the OVGA podcast.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the OVGA podcast with myself, Ibrahim, Coleman, Dan, and Sanford. Be sure to follow us on our Facebook group, the Original Video Game Artwork Collectors. There's also a website, originalvideogameart.com, if you want to learn more about this hobby. Over to you, Sanford.
All right. So the last time we had an episode, we did a preview of some auctions on Heritage from Adam Harvey. For today, this will be episode 3. We're going to run through a bit of the state of the market, talking a bit about some of the results from the Adam Harvey auction, a few pieces that we have preview upcoming in auction. Then we're going to revisit one of the topics we touched on last episode, and then we'll end the episode with a collection spotlight, showcasing a piece from one of our collections. So with that, I think we can jump right into a bit of our discussion of the Heritage auction.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really good auction. The that Adam Harvey's lots. I personally feel they did really, really well.
Agreed. Some definitely noteworthy ones there. Everything from the Zelda to, I like the Pac-Man, as you all know. Yeah, some high, some low, but I think generally we all would have to agree that things went a bit higher than generally.
I think the only one where the result was okay to maybe a bit underwhelming was that Sonic. Everything else did very well. The Zelda prelim pages were eyebrow raisers, I thought, like, okay. But there were some other strong results. Nothing was really weak, I thought, except maybe that Sonic. That was a good deal for someone, and that someone has identified themselves in the group, so it's really no surprise. It's a Greg Martin, it's a Sonic. Right there, you've got some value. I suppose that, like, one thing I found a bit awkward about the piece was just like the pose where Sonic's kind of twisting in the air and whatever. I found that a little, a little weird. But when you look at the actual packaging, you can see why. I guess the composition of it with the figure off to the right and everything. But when you look at the package, you can see why the blister for that LCD game takes away all the background if you're looking at the package, and all you can really see is that thin strip with the figure. And so I think on purpose he shifted the figure way right and then gave him a twist to make it a little dynamic on the packaging. So the packaging comes out wonderful. But the composition on the original ends up being a little unusual. And but still wonderful, and a great price on it, and everything. What were the other noteworthy ones? Like the Superman went for, was it 9,000?
Yeah, I think just about $9,000.
Yeah, that seemed pretty solid too. I mean, you've got the the strong character there and everything, but it was a pretty there wasn't a background or anything to it, but well-known game.
Hard. If you're collecting artwork for the N64, there's not many pieces out there. That's when everything pretty much went digital. So to get a piece for the N64 is very, very difficult, let alone, I think, an IP like, something like Superman. That's, that just takes it up another notch. So I think that's why that piece, sort of went for that. But if that was fully illustrated, I would, that would be a lot more, at least 2-3 times more. But you get what you pay for.
And it's famous for being the worst game on the system. So it's like one of those.
Which helps. I think that helps.
Yeah.
I think that helps.
No, I mean,
I don't think the buyer cares.
No.
I mean, but I think, like, having a reputation means something. I mean, there are games that I own artwork for that I'll show it to another collector and there's no reaction, even though they buy artwork and they're into this stuff just because they don't know the Sega Genesis library like I do. And they'll be like, oh, then they'll kind of pause and say, what is it? And I have to tell them, right? But if you say, oh, this is Superman 64, everyone's like, oh, I know that. which
Yeah.
is something. What was Dan talking a bit about Sonic Blast and that Greg Martin piece, kind of where it ended. And I think one kind of constant across the auction is, I know it's elementary, but in any auction you need two bidders. So consistently when you're seeing something on the high ends where you have that second bidder, and some things where Sonic very well could have ended at a different price just by a second person bidding a little bit more. And I know that was, as I sort the auction kind of results from high to low for the artwork, we've talked a little bit about the Sonic Blast piece. We talked a little bit about Superman piece. Those are kind of the two final illustrations in the auction, or two of the final illustrations. But the top five pieces were the top piece we haven't talked about yet was the Kellogg's Frosted Mini Wheats one, followed by the Zelda comic pages. So it was the Kellogg's Frosted at 9,600, followed by the Legend of Zelda pages at 9,000, Superman also at 9,000. Then there was the Greg Martin color prelim for the NES Pac-Man release. That was at 8,400, and then Sonic Blast at 7,200.
Yeah, for me
Solid numbers.
that Pac-Man sort of stands out from the others you mentioned, because the Zelda is yes, it's a video game, but at the same time it's a comic page, and no, I think it probably went for what it did potentially. I mean, we discussed this. Maybe it was because of the scene with Link and Zelda kissing or something. Maybe that bumped it up a little bit. But I would put that sort of more in the I don't know.
No,
But
yeah, I think someone's bidding because it's Zelda, whether they're kissing, whether it's an action scene, whether it's
would you put that
3.
more in a video game sort of category or a comic?
It's completely a video
Both,
game.
right?
Both.
I mean,
All right.
like I would
The bidder would be a game bidder, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
some of that was, we talked, I think, Dan, you might have, talking in the Facebook group a little bit about this. If you kind of took the bidding on the prelim pages and kind of extrapolated it, right? So you've got kind of the prices that a comic page prelim would go for, the prices that a comic final interior might go for, then a half splash, then a full splash, then a cover, and kind of that hierarchy, where the bidding was on prelim pages definitely represented that it was, the bidder was bidding because it was Zelda, and because of Zelda being a game, probably more than its history as a comic.
Yeah. Again, the that what's called Kellogg's one. That's one I was really surprised with.
And it was the top
Yeah,
piece.
that shocked. Yeah, that really shocked me. So at least two people were gunning for that, and that did really well. But yeah, it was a shocker, especially because we've had Kellogg's before. Like there was a Kellogg's Mario piece, maybe last year, and well, actually twice. There was one last year, was the black and white, and then there was one 2 or 3 years ago, and all were like under $3,000 maybe. So I was really surprised with this one.
Well, I don't know. I was surprised that it ended up being the top selling art piece in the lot, in the auction. However, in the January auction, there was one of the
Mario Kellogg's
one of the
where
Mario's
it's like a
ones.
circle.
Well, I think, yeah, and that itself was sold in the 2020 auctions. So
Yeah.
some of the first times that some of the game art was coming up to auction in mid 2020, one of those Kellogg's pieces sold, and then the person, resubmitted it, a few years later for the January 2023 auction. And I think originally it probably sold for $1,500, $1,800. And I think this time,
I think it was
time
more
around,
like 3 and it went up to 5. I think it went up
Okay.
about 50%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which was positive to see, right? I mean, as we just kind of look at state of the market as a whole, certainly the enduring popularity of things like Mario, things like Zelda, but just that, for someone who did buy something to then reconsign it and have it do well, all right, certainly a good sign for anyone that's interested in buying this kind of artwork.
Yeah, looking at it now, like if that Kellogg's piece was in January, where we had the video game auction, I don't think it would have went for that. But it's good to see where the market is now. More collectors are actively looking for, pieces like that. Especially, I mean, I guess it had Mario, it had Zelda, it had what was it called, Samus on it. So if
Yoshi.
somebody wanted to take a trifecta of getting all those characters, then that explains it.
Yeah, and two things there. Like, on the one hand, you mentioned January, and I think like it's clear that there was a bit of a bounce back from January. January results, were disappointing. I think these definitely came up from that, so that was good to see. And the other side of that is that imagine how much it would have gone for without the blue triangle.
Oh, yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
had the characters kind of on the edge of a blue triangle in the middle, and on the printed version of that, there was something there, like there was text in that blue triangle. But I think if you take that away, if you had a piece that was clean with the four first party franchises on it that kind of didn't have that in the middle, I could see bidding being that much stronger and it going for maybe twice as much if it doesn't have that obstruction in the middle. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, one thing that stands out to me is, so as I was, and we'll save this for the end, but as I was prepping, I'll be the one to share something today for the collection spotlight. But it's, in the first episode, we all kind of gave a little introduction. When did we buy our first piece? What was it? And I couldn't remember when mine was exactly. So I said, oh, maybe 2017, maybe 2018. So I looked it up. It was March 2018. And I bring that up to say that, over this last now 5.5 years, it's taken time for my eyes to see pieces, for kind of what to look past what they are in a way. So as Dan talks about that blue triangle, I know that if I were looking at that piece a couple of years ago, I would have only seen Mario, Samus, Link, and Yoshi. And I'm like, wow, it's got all the Nintendo characters. That's what I'm bidding on. I'm bidding on those characters. And I think now looking at it, I would say, aesthetically it's got the characters, but the blue triangle is, half the image or something. And I know that's something that has taken my eyes longer to see and think about. And maybe that's only just through, owning other artwork and comparing them and holding them in hand and seeing how I feel. But to the piece's credit, it was a larger size piece. So it'll still
Absolutely.
present very well for someone.
Yep. Yeah, I know
especially
someone will be very happy with that.
Yeah.
There's so much nostalgia with just a cereal box too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the buyer was someone who remembers that box.
It came with a cereal box too, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about just reading the cereal box when you're eating your cereal. Maybe you've stared at that image a number of times. You read that box from front to back. I remember doing that as a kid. Like,
you're high on sugar, so it's all a good time. And
hallelujah.
Now, it was awesome that Adam had sourced the actual cereal box to include, because I remember saying in our preview, I couldn't find that image online. So it was good that he had found it, included it with it, helped Heritage show how it was used, which they're not always able to do. And then for the buyer, they have it. They know, oh, this is how you use it, where it is. They can document it online if they want. But I do wonder, I kind of hope, if the buyer ends up framing it, I know we kind of have different opinions in this group on how to frame things. So, I think trying to get that entire cereal box framed with the artwork, I think would look a little weird and take away from the piece itself. And, this is, I think, even though I've got this Galaxy Force here framed with the published box underneath it, I think I'm definitely moving in a direction of not including the published image in my framing. Maybe if it's smaller, kind of like the difference in size here. But I know as cool as it is to have the cereal box, hopefully that would be kind of kept on the side and with it versus trying to put it in the frame.
Yeah, I think it's too big to frame with it. If it, as you said, if it's a smaller piece, then that makes sense. Otherwise, your eyes will sort of be distracted from looking at the artwork. But yeah, moving on to the Pac-Man comp. That's where we see a NES comp, and that did what was that, 8,000, 9,000, and
8,400.
Yeah, that was for me. That's like one of the standout pieces, and in my mind, when I look at a sketch, a draft, or a comp, I just think between, oh, you know what, it should go for between 10 to 20% of the price of the final. And I would just sometimes work it out in my head. And I think that did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we kind of went through this last time. I mean, it ticked a lot of boxes. You've got the color comp, which is hard to get, but more importantly, it's an NES title. It's collectible NES. It's a nice image. It's Greg Mart. Like, it just, you go on down the list. So I can see why, someone would be very excited to get that. So, but at the same time, like you said, it's good money too.
I think I like the concept Ibrahim saying, "Oh, the prelim should sell for 10 to 20%."
It shouldn't, but just like figuring out sort of a rough idea.
You think it should or shouldn't? What do you mean?
So when I'm like sort of looking at something, I'd be like, okay, you know what, that the final is like, I don't know, a $150,000 piece, right? So I'm like, okay, the sketch is 15 grand. So I'll work it out in my head, something like that. Anything between 10 and 20. It's not a perfect math, but that's how I sort of sometimes work out things in my head. And it was nice to see that piece go for that much. Yeah, it was just for me that it was an interesting piece. It's nice to see that a comp can go for that money, and it potentially could go for much more. But yeah, it was just a good result to have.
I think it's interesting you say that. I used to use kind of the 10% benchmark in my head too. I've started thinking about it more as like it could be 3% and it could be 20%, and it all depends on what we're looking at, because there are some
they're not all equal. Not all comps are equal. Yeah,
they're not all equal. Some of them are very loose, very sketchy, hardly there, and then some of them are like, wow, almost a finished piece. So, I think that does impact, the value. But I think there's also kind of, I for it to be more than 10%, to me it has to be pretty outstanding. Like I think 20% is the exception, not the rule. But hey, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think what it's interesting. You have certain conversations in isolation about numbers, what it could result to, how to calculate it. But I think as we look at auctions, so much kind of comes back to a question of who are the bidders, and I mean that from a is there a bidder or will they show up kind of standpoint. So the Greg Martin Sonic Blast piece could have easily sold for double, and we all would have said, yep, that makes sense. And it would have just been a second person, another person showing up and bidding against the winner. I think if not so much for the color comp, but if we're talking about, say, the final piece, I say, okay, this, whatever particular illustration is $50,000. And I think in conversations on Facebook or other places, it's really easy to just throw out a number and assign it to someone. But then as you walk back, say, okay, if this is going to be a $50,000 piece, who has the money and who's actually bidding on it? And is there a second person that has that same amount? So in January, right, we certainly saw that with Bionic Commando and with Prince of Persia kind of getting up in that range. And I think both had the merits to sell for those prices, and they were great results, incredible pieces. But for other pieces, as we, think about value and assign, oh, this is what it should sell for, I can see the potential with some, not to say distortion, but as certain prelims and other things come up, there might not be the buyer at 10 times that price. But there might be someone willing to say, wow, this, not even just for this Pac-Man, but kind of for anything. If it's a Sonic prelim, if it's Mario, actually we saw it a bit with the Mario Game Gallery. But that, someone in that looking to get a first piece of art saying, I want that franchise, will bid up a little bit more beyond what we might expect prelims could sell for, just because that same person wouldn't be on the other end of the equation as the 10 times that bidder on the painted piece.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And it's funny, all the pieces we've mentioned, they're all strong characters. You know, we started with the Superman, Sonic, you know, then we had the Kellogg's, all Mario, Link, Yoshi, Samus. So it's maybe that also plays a lot into it, you know, Pac-Man also. So yeah, it's, but I think every result, every auction we have is because this is still a, you know, a young, new hobby. And it's just great to have those markers out there, especially when we can compare it to January.
Yeah, and I think the as I briefly mentioned the Mario game gallery, and I didn't realize it till I pulled the numbers back up, but that was actually the number 6 piece out of the 16 that were put up. So coming down from Sonic Blast at 7,200, the Mario game gallery ended at 3,240. Which I think was, you know, 8 sketches, 4 detailed, 4 a little bit looser. Yeah, I think a great result for both the buyer and the seller. There might have been a comment where if someone wanted to break those up and kind of keep a couple for themselves and sell some of them, that would be an option. But I think still the, that Mario got the attention it deserves.
Nice.
Yeah, as you had said, I think that, you know, Adam really did a good job of choosing a bunch of IPs, including the Superman, is like things that people know, whatever it may be. It was just so recognizable. The prices they all made sense, and they all, I wouldn't say that they were consistent, but they were a nice way to, I mean, there was a clear thread throughout the auction, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And, you know, when you do say
there was a theme to the consignments, is that
there
what
was
you
a
mean?
theme. There was definitely a theme, and it was well thought out. You know, and I'm not saying that the January auction was not, but there were some games in the January auction where it's kind of like, what's that game? What's the, you know, I
So
know.
no, it's a
Yeah.
good point, but I think it's interesting with, and so from the Adam's auction being the Adam Harvey collection, right? There was one person, you know, in conversation with
Curated.
Heritage, right?
Yeah.
Curating what was going to be in there and what made sense, anticipating what the buyer pool might be interested. Whereas I think January was several different consigners with this overall goal of, can we have a video game art auction, and what would that look like? So I know certainly between some of us that consigned, this first thought was, how do you get enough pieces to warrant having its own section,
Dedicated
right?
auction,
Dedicated auction, right? How do you get there, and which pieces are you going to consign? And I think even today, you know, we said if that Kellogg's piece that sold for 9,600 in Adam's auction, if that had showed up in January, we all think it would have sold for less.
Absolutely.
So I think, and it even, you know, it was not clear what the January auction was going to do. I think the pieces I consigned, I probably sent in August, September, maybe, right? So it was you know, quite a bit ahead of time. But not knowing how that auction was going to go also dictated how pieces were chosen, right? You say, well, I don't want to take a chance on this. I'm okay to see how that does. And I think now seeing that the results of that first auction may be kind of a dip a bit with macroeconomic stuff in consideration. Now seeing where Adam's auction is, and then maybe this is a good segue for a couple of the, you know, we have maybe I think 3 pieces we'll talk about today that are coming up on auction, also at Heritage. Before we make that transition, was there any other things you guys wanted to touch on from Adam's auction?
I mean, you know, not really, other than as you were speaking, it kind of came to mind that, you know, one of the things that Adam did, as you said, was pull recognizable IP, but by the same token, as a result of that, perhaps, most of the pieces were preliminary pieces. So, you know, they were all recognizable, but they were prelim, and so it was interesting to see how that all played out.
Also,
You know,
I mean, he was testing the water, I think, with the market. So I think it was a good move. I mean, if it would be difficult for someone like Adam to just, you know, put in 3, let's say, box arts in, especially after the January auction. So I think it was perfect timing for those type of pieces he put in.
Well, I mean, even just ahead of the auction with that in mind, Ibrahim, I mean, there was something Dan made available in the Facebook group that, the kind of premise of the post there was, hey, we haven't seen a single final box art advertised since January. And at that point, that was June, July, maybe. So, more than 6 months had passed. And I think that was probably a reflection of the auction results in January, that if you were someone who owned one of those a painted final box art and, looking back at January auction, as a buyer, I'm very happy. I have the Mick McGinty Die Hard arcade piece. I think that sold for $6. And, I never would have thought that I would end up with that for $6. So if I'm now the owner, seeing like it's a benefit for me as a buyer, but I'm not going to want to consign that same piece blindly into an auction. So I think we did see people not really advertising those pieces, things not coming up for sale for that 6-month period. Now, some discussion, some things in the Facebook group. But now, we do have a couple things that we can preview that are coming up. I think of the 3, again, none of them, but one of them is box art, but we'll discuss it.
To sort of lead into the transfer here, I wanted to bring it up earlier, but I didn't want to jump too quick. And it's maybe not the best way to lead, but this is the way I'm doing it. You were mentioning kind of the importance of having the published item with the finished artwork. As Adam presented his Kellogg's box art, which is like, you couldn't find it, no one could find it, where is the box art? But he presented it for the buyer, and it's a really nice thing to do. So without further ado, we got here this guy here. Very beautiful piece of artwork, in my opinion. I definitely drool over it. I love the image.
So image isn't up yet for me, and I know we have some people that are going to be audio. So what are you seeing?
I am seeing. Is it not? Can you not see it?
It's there now.
It's just loaded now. Yeah.
Got it. Super Mario Brothers 3 French promotional poster cover original art. It's a beautiful image.
It's a poster.
It's the artwork for the poster.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So, we all are kind of having issues locating it. I wouldn't call them doubts that there is a final published piece, but it really would have been beneficial to, I'm not saying that the co-signer had it to provide.
There are doubts, right? There are doubts. I mean, that's what you're getting at, and we're trying to allay those doubts. We had discussed it a bit in the group. I'd sent an email to Heritage. To Heritage's credit, one of their representatives, Olivier, responded to me yesterday privately. And I sent him an email, but it was late last night. I sent him an email to say, "Hey, can I share your response on the group?" I don't have his permission yet to do that, so assuming he gives that, I will post that publicly on the group. But essentially, he gave some other details, but it wasn't really anything that led to being able to say it was used on this product, or whatever. We're kind of left with the information in the auction. To Coleman's point, it's a beautiful image. We've got the airship, we've got Mario and Luigi, we've got the castle, we've got the bad guys running around on the airship. We've got Zelda, I think, being held hostage there against the ship's mast or something. There's a lot there to like. It's very well executed. It's just, where was it used? I mean, look, I'm sure it was probably used. They're saying it was. So, hey, great. It's just that we can't verify it as of right now. Maybe it'll come to light, but as of right now, we can't. But it's a great image. I mean, you couldn't ask for a nicer sort of Mario image from that time. And that alone really, irrespective, I think, Sanford, this was your point in private discussions. irrespective of whether we nailed down how that was used or, if or whatever, at the end of the day, there's no doubt that it came from Nintendo somehow, some way, and, it'll sell for a good result just based on what it is and what the image is.
Yeah, I think the image will be what sells it. Even whether it's, we clearly know it was Nintendo International. There were some puzzles in the January auction that were also Nintendo International French or Nintendo International licensed products, official but abroad. Puzzles that were kind of the black line art. And those, were in the $1,000 range there, kind of maybe almost viewed as preliminaries. This one clearly fully painted, a larger image, also French and international, is clearly going to outsell those. But I think what will sell this will just be the image itself. Even if we find out, this was actually for a poster that someone could buy in stores versus a promotional poster up to advertise the game, or if we discover it was also for a puzzle or something else, that I think at this point discovering that usage probably won't increase the overall price much because it'll be a minor usage. And I think it'll all come back to, will knowing that really affect what two potential buyers would bid for this? Maybe a little bit, but I think the image is what'll sell this, and I think it'll do quite well.
I think it will make a difference, though. I mean, for me personally, I'd like to know if it was published, even if, as you said, it was published in the most minor way. It does affect how much I would bid on it, and that's just personally how how I'd like to know if it was published or not. Whether that's putting an extra few thousand on it, or maybe a bit more than that. But it does affect my overall decision on how much I would bid. Not saying I am bidding, but if I was, definitely knowing it was published, I'd put a few grand more on it. Absolutely.
Hey, Coleman, is it possible for us to flip to the next image on the heritage screen that we have up? Because
do you mean
actually, no,
go
to the fourth one, please, and then zoom in on the bottom right. Yeah. Actually, that one's fine. Just zoom in on the bottom right. So this is where we talk about my ignorance, because in the Facebook group, I had posed the question of, well, why is there English in the bottom right there? Because if this is a French poster, you'd think there'd be French. If it's being approved by head office in Japan, you'd think there'd be Japanese characters in the bottom right there. Why English? And what Olivier had said was, actually, that's format real, which would be French for actual size. So actual size 70 by, I think that says 200. It's hard to really tell what that squiggle is.
100.
100?
Yeah. Only due to the shape of talking ratios,
Okay, so that leaves us with those are interesting, right? Because if the 100 is millimeters, which is where my mind goes with that,
it's not, it can't be millimeters. That's tiny.
That's too small. But centimeters is too big.
It's big. It's a meter long. It's a meter.
Centimeters is a meter. Huge. That's kind of too big for a poster, but
yeah.
But this is where I'm probably saying something ignorant again, but just on the face of, and I haven't had the question, the time to kind of go through.
What
that
does it say in the description on the size?
Does it say anything about that?
15 inches.
That's the image, though. That's the image.
Yeah, I will say that promotional Swedish video game posters are 70 centimeters by 100 centimeters.
Really?
So that matches.
Which it is a little unusual size. Like I don't know the name. It's like A whatever, B what, I think it's B technically. But yeah, so it is a standard size here in Sweden, but this is a French poster. I guess sounds like they do it too. So it's not too unusual.
There was a Swedish poster of similar artwork, right?
No, magazine.
Yeah, it was a
Okay.
magazine centerfold or something.
Right.
So,
I will also like to bring some attention to the international licensed product thing. So I think licensed product means it was for sale. So that, I mean, that word
Yes, that's right.
promotional,
Yeah.
that word promotional suggests that, I mean, promotional can be something for sale. So, you're still promoting something.
This
What
would have
it
been
is,
available, I think, to the public to buy.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still promoting the item,
Yeah.
whatever
It
it
could
may be.
it could have been a towel. Like it could be any product, honestly.
Yep.
Huh. You know what's weird though is now that I was thinking through the numbers, but they're backwards, right? If this were to be reproduced at 70 by 100 centimeters, 100 centimeters about 40 inches, and what did we say this was? About 21 inches tall. So it'd be very
Yeah.
weird to reproduce an image larger than the original size, I think. But I guess I'm not too familiar with posters in larger formats. But typically for the game boxes, you'd maybe paint it at 200% of the size and shrink it down. So this is interesting to see it in the reverse.
Yeah, that's an interesting note.
It's not without precedent when it comes to stuff like that. Like, if when it comes to movie posters and stuff in general, I mean, some of those movie posters that are 2, 4, 6 sheets, the original would never be that big. It'd be blown up to it. So, it can happen.
So before
I would like to say that I have definitely searched through the cavernous depths of French internet, and I have unsuccessfully, I believe with the rest of you, unsuccessfully found this image. But a small part of me is hoping that somebody out there has found this image published somewhere. And is either keeping it quiet for themselves or just share it amongst a small group of friends. But best of luck to each and every one of you. I hope that someone finds it and lets me know.
All right, guys, what's this selling for?
So one
with buyer's premium.
Yeah, one
All
small
in.
wrinkle before we jump in with the actual numbers, right? I think it is interesting with the is this international comic auction. There is a buyer's the BP here is 25% instead of 20% that we would typically see in the comic auctions in the US. So yeah, with BP, this is already at 3,600, which is half of what the Sonic Blast at. I think certainly knowing the results of Sonic Blast is going to color this here, but I do think the Mara will outsell that Sonic Blast, despite that being Greg Martin clearly published, clearly knowing where it was, arguably also being box art. I still think this is going to end up outselling that, but I'll kick it over to you guys for actual numbers.
12,000?
Yeah, what did I say? 11 and a half, I think is what I said to you guys earlier. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, the group think is kind of in force, I guess, because I'm somewhere in that range. I'm kind of thinking, 9 on the low end, 13 on the high, but at the end of the day, it could, who knows? I mean, it could surprise in either direction. But probably to the high side. I don't see it, like Sanford said, I do see it outselling the Sonic Blast. So I think we get to 8 range at a minimum is my guess. And then from there, who knows what the top end is or isn't.
Hey Dan, I hadn't thought about this, but anything I've won from auction has been out of Texas. Is when they do the international auctions like this, if you're a U.S. buyer, are you now paying that higher shipping cost, or is Heritage doing anything on the back end to get it to Texas to then transship in the U.S.?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. Ibrahim, do you know?
I think it would just come direct to you.
Okay.
No, what he's asking is it being shipped from Europe to you direct? Oh, maybe that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's being shipped from Europe to you directly.
I mean, I assume this is Heritage France, so that they have their own shipping department. They would ship it straight out.
Yeah. So, but what that would mean for a U.S. buyer is just a higher shipping cost.
Yeah, I don't
Which
think
I
A
mean, I
little
don't think
bit.
it matters for this piece.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about it, right? 'Cause,
Yeah. So you didn't give your prediction.
I mean,
He's
I think
avoiding the question.
no, I really
Good.
don't know, right? I think I think selling for less than 10 would make sense for this piece, but I think it's going to sell for more than 10. So whether
If it
that's
was
8 to 13
published,
range,
would you change
Oh,
your
it would
estimate?
be.
yeah, okay, that's fair, right? I think if it were, I do think it was published. If we knew
Right.
where it was published, I think
Yeah.
I'd put out the 12 number, and then if you
Yeah.
want to add your 3 and say
3,
15,
15.
I guess what gets hard for me is thinking now. Mario has a huge bidder pool. I know you can easily make the Mario 64 comparison, which had the 1.5 million Wata sale on Heritage, and I think that is in the past. That's kind of a blip, but it sold for that because it was Mario and people wanted it.
Right.
This one here, I don't know. I think certain
Keep in
U.S.
mind,
buyers
the
would be less
Kellogg's went for
interested.
8.
No, the Kellogg's went for 9,600. So
96. There you go. So looking at the Kellogg's and looking at this, it's like it would be a shocker if this sells under that. So 12 is very fair in my opinion, comparing it to that result. So I think if it was published 15 to 20 in comparison to the Kellogg's piece, that justifies it. But if this goes under 10, it's a real shocker, especially after that recent result.
I just don't think you can play that game that because then Abraham, we're at the point where we say, well, if Zelda prelim pages went for 10,
yeah,
then this must be 9.3 million. It doesn't really work that way.
I think the other factors too here is that Dan, we've kind of talked, right? I certainly value U.S. published artwork. And I'll look at even among Japanese art or European artwork, I can appreciate it, but for my collection, it's going to be generally more U.S. focused. And if it's a nice image, right, I can still like and collect something. But I think I don't know how high U.S. buyers would go for this same piece. Maybe there is no difference, but I do think the other dynamic that really does matter is I talked earlier on in an auction you need 2 buyers, and who are they going to be to bid against each other to get it to a certain price or not. Adam's auction had a dedicated group of people who know Adam, tracking this auction, looking at it for all the variety of interesting pieces in there, and having eyes on that auction. This is one video game piece in I think a multi-day international comics auction that I don't know what time of day it's landing at. I know I'm not going to watch this auction live.
It's the pool of bidders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the pool of
it's going to be it's a different pool of bidders from Adam's auction to this one. Even if there's overlap, I think the overall pool is different.
Well, that's interesting to see the result. I'm sure we'll discuss it. But yeah,
5 days.
Well, Coleman, you want to pull up the next one?
Let's move on to the next one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So this one is October 6th. The next piece that we're coming up is in a October 12th Sega auction.
Now, this is the most important piece I've ever seen.
I wonder why you're saying that.
It's my consignment. I'll just go ahead and say that.
All right, let's move on to the next.
All right, so let me just describe what it is without the peanut gallery cackling. So yeah, it's, as you can see, as you can see on the last 2 pages, there's like a memo sheet essentially about about the game, kind of explaining what they're doing there. And then there's some Japanese sort of drawings and characters and stuff. Those last 2 are faxes. And this is part of the material that was provided to guide the artist. So, this is material I ended up purchasing as we bought some stuff from Mick. I believe this came from him. It had to have. Mick.
And that would be Mick McGinty.
Mick McGinty, thank you. Yeah, who illustrated the Streets of Rage 2 artwork. He would keep on certain titles, he would keep things like magazine clippings. Like, for example, there's a few Street Fighter pieces he did for that Street Fighter control stick, Capcom control stick that came out, where he had clipped out poses from like weightlifting magazines and stuff, and then you could see, he'd illustrated the character in the same pose as in the weightlifting magazine, so he's using those for reference. And so I believe that these came to Mick from Japan as reference for him to, look at the characters and so on. And as I think I'm going to make a habit, I brought props. So 1 second.
Ooh.
So
Show and tell. Show and tell.
So on the go back to that 4th page.
Yep.
Yeah, you see the character in the middle of the screen there. I don't know what those are called, but you can see, Mick did a prelim here where he's bashing that character square in the chops, and so this was all part of the material used to develop that game.
Can you bring that a bit closer to the camera?
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah,
that's better.
There we go.
Can you see the full thing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Looking good.
So anyway, so that's some of the material from Street Fighter 2. It's on the one hand, like the art itself of it, obviously
Streets of Rage 2.
Streets of Rage. Yeah.
What did I say?
Street Fighter.
Street Fighter.
Oh, okay.
Noob.
Yeah, exactly. So on the one hand, look, it's relatively minor in terms of the artwork itself. On the other hand, it's a cool insight into the process and part of the material that was all pre-production. So we'll see where it goes. Value wise, we probably don't need to throw out predictions, but that's what the item is. And
so this
you guys
is
have
coming
anything to
up.
add? It's coming up October 12th in the Ages of Sega auction.
That's right. That's a Thursday auction, all Sega focused, mostly graded games. This one's in there, and then we did see shared in the Facebook group. There are, one other lot for a couple pieces related to Shakan board game artwork, but that same property got a Sega Genesis release. So those two in the same October 12th auction.
Can you move to the next character, Coleman?
Yep. Here we go. Oh, next character? Yeah.
That's probably the one that sells the lot, right?
Yeah.
No,
I was just gonna say, like, it does have a hint of like a Japanese illustrator. Like, it's got like a that vibe. You can definitely tell. Like, if it wasn't if you didn't say it was Mick, no way I'd say that's a Mick. I wouldn't have guessed it.
I don't think it's mixed. It's not. I don't think it's mixed artwork, Ibrahim.
Okay, I thought that's what you were saying. I'm like, what? That's Mick?
No, it's material provided to Mick,
right?
For Mick to use as reference.
Okay, I got you. That makes a lot of sense now.
I got it from Mick, but it's not Mick material.
Okay.
Yeah. So we think this would behind the scenes kind of think about how do we describe this? What is this? I mean, I think it's probably material prepared in Japan, provided to Mick and or the design firm that hired Mick to say, here's some reference material. We'd like you to make the US box art. This, the two images here, and the photocopy, and then the letter, right, provides some of the context of the reference material that he then would have used. These are the characters, work these characters into the image.
Got you. I thought the last image, the facts, that was like from Japan, and then the artworks were by Mick. So I was a bit confused. Sorry, I wasn't listening. That clearly. Sorry. But really nice pieces. I am actually bidding on this. Just so.
Even though we didn't read the description.
Yeah.
I might place a bid right now then. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, Coleman. So
shall we move on?
We got one more we're going to spotlight. Let's pull that one up.
This.
So this is the one where. So this is it's for a Game Boy Simpsons release called Bart vs. Juggernauts, or The Simpsons Bart vs. Juggernauts. This is the one at the beginning where we said, hey, there haven't really been any box art. I said, and we're going to preview 3, and I was kind of pausing to say they're not box art. Kind of thinking through this one. So this one in the description is named, it includes Bill Morrison's name in the credit. He is the artist that would have done all of the final line work for all of the Simpsons, pretty much all the Simpsons video game art at that time, pretty much all licensing material. Bill would have been doing the pencils and the final line art for them. But what we have here in this auction, and I think we'll touch on that history and information that Dan might be able to share. But this is a painted cell. And there's two separate layers. There's the painted cell, kind of like the animation style. There's an all purple, presumably airbrushed background. So those two elements, you lay one over to the other to get close to that final setup that you would then photograph to reproduce the boxes. But I know I can't speak too much about the cell creation process, but my understanding is it would be, maybe a more junior artist in a studio who would take on those kinds of duties. But I'll pause there and maybe kick it over to you, Dan.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I guess the first thing I'll touch on is that if we go to the purple background, because I saw Coleman, I think I saw you kind of zooming in on some of the white paint and red paint and whatever. It seems to me like that red is right where the baton on Bart would be, the red baton, if you go back. And, you can see how some of the white kind of lines up with the Bart figure too. So like, it seems to me that at some, those two were probably pressed up against each other for many years. And I'm guessing, it's a guess, but the red does seem to be in the right place, that some of it kind of stuck, leaving some remnants maybe, or maybe peeled some of the purple off.
I think it peeled it. That's what it is. I've had cells before with a background, and it's, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, oh, it was stored together. It's stuck together. They peeled it off. It's peeled a bit of the background off. I think that's exactly what we're looking at.
Okay. So, but I think there's a bit of transference both ways. The red is transferring from the cell to the background, and then the white is where the purple's been peeled off. So it's going in both directions. So that's a condition issue, and that's fine. Sanford's question was about process, and I did when this piece kind of came out on the group publicly. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago or something, and at the time I asked Bill about it because I do own the final inks to this exact piece. So I asked Bill about it, and what he told me at the time was that, he would do the inks and then transfer have those photographed onto a cell, and then I brought props. So he'd start with, his pencils. Like here's Krusty's Funhouse. He'd start with his pencils. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yeah.
From his pencils, he would go to final line art. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
So this would then get photographed onto a cell, just the lines, and then he would give instruction to his assistant on how to paint it. So here's a literal example of the instructions. You can see that these like OR2, that would be like presumably orange 2, don't do streak, sock shadow, B20, like those are all colors for the, colorist to then go ahead and paint up the cell according to his instructions. And so what we have here, presumably, is the end result of, someone applying the paint per Bill's instructions to come up with the final cell. So, it's a cool piece. It's a little different in that, it's the animation style. We don't see too many of those. And then it's Bill, but it's not Bill because he didn't he wouldn't have really touched any of this, but it would have all been his vision. So, how does that play
So
into
it's
how much?
Bill's design, we can say. It's
Yeah,
designed by Bill, and then colored
Carried
yeah,
out
by
by someone
someone
else.
else.
by his assistant. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he did tell me that in an email at the time. So,
Well, actually, Ibrahim, is your
how one values all that is hard to
Yeah.
say. Now, the logo, can we talk about that? I think one of you
Yeah,
guys
I've
said
sort of
that
been
that was a
avoiding it for until now.
yeah. Okay.
so this is
Well, this
yeah,
is where I
not
personally feel that I was, tricked, because this Sanford's, I'll tee it over to you, but this is not original.
no, yeah, this is same with that Nintendo logo. This whole setup here, commissioned by another artist, right? And this seems very common among animation art collectors, who buy a cell and then they'll make a photocopied background to give themselves a nice setup for display. Or they'll just take whatever background they have that doesn't match the cell, pair them up, display. It looks nice. It's on the wall. It's affordable depending on what it is. In this case here, this is, I think, in an effort to make the piece very presentable. I'm sure these are on 3 separate layers, and if you wanted, you could take the original cell layer, the original purple black background, and then I presume this commission title here is also on an acetate sheet because it's photographed on the black background there. If the buyer wanted, you could pair all 3 of these up to say, wow, this looks exactly like the box art. I'll frame it, I'll put it on the wall, I'll display it. But that title logo there is not original. It's not from the production of this game. It's done by another artist. Heritage does do a very good job mentioning that. But if you're just looking at the images, that wouldn't be apparent. And then I always kind of wonder down the line if it's being resold to the second person, or if someone buys it in between, that kind of history gets lost. And all of a sudden you've got, which might be hand painted, but still not original from back then, being passed off as here's the title art for this game.
Yeah, and when you go back to that image, Coleman, and we look at that little Nintendo logo on the bottom, that kind of to me, that just looks
you
wrong.
can see it.
You
You can
can
see it. It's a little off. Yeah.
You could see that it's hand painted. Why would they hand paint that? They wouldn't. They'd have that very precisely done as a layer at the printer that would go onto the bottom. Like that wouldn't have been, if you had the original title cell, that Nintendo logo wouldn't be there, because at the end of the day, when they're doing the title logo, that's all they're doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You wouldn't get
that's a
any of the
fun
rest of that stuff with it.
Plus, having 3 cells sandwiched together, I mean, that it will take a lot away from the first image, the Bart piece, because and if you're gonna frame it too, then good luck framing a cell with multiple layers, like 3 layers. That's a nightmare.
So it's kind of interesting you held that example up, Dan, because I just like the Nintendo logo would be standard every single time. It looks like the Simpsons logo is probably also standard every time, because the one you held up just had
Good point.
Krusty's Funhouse, right? Where you don't need to say, he never needs to write the Simpsons again, because that is written a specific way every time. So I mean, I don't think that
you're exactly right. The original cell would have just had Bart versus the Juggernauts and nothing else.
Yep. And I think I don't think this hurts the whatever it sells for. I don't think it bumps it up either. You just hope that the person bidding on it knows what they're bidding on. I know, this is still original from the period for the main 2 images, then reproduced onto the box. I know, I think certainly at least Dan and I, probably the 4 of us in this group, would kind of value that final line inked artwork as the final illustration. Even if then there was this cell that was painted and matches the box and was reproduced, that kind of line between the artistry and the creation of what the final original is. But I do think, for someone that wants something Simpsons, and for a Nintendo system, that the fact that there's that title artwork in the last piece probably won't really have any influence over the price.
I would have liked to see a picture with just the Simpsons Bart and with the background only, not the commission piece, just those two, just so you
Yeah.
can see if the damage sort of, I don't know, it's
as
it's
I
more than
do
it
this, you
is.
can really
Yeah, you can see
kind of
it's you
see
can
how
see the
the.
outline.
I
Yeah,
should have done that earlier, but whatever. Yeah.
but yeah, another fun piece, I guess. Be nice.
So
I can't give you a prediction on price on this. I have
Yeah, it's a tough one.
no clue,
Yeah.
no idea.
and
Yeah.
and hasn't opened for auction. This one will
Yeah.
be as part of the video game signature auction, November 3rd or 4th. These pieces don't yet have lot numbers. I don't think we yet know which session it'll be in between those days, but we're still a month away, and I'm sure this will be one we'll share in the Facebook group, and it'll be discussed a little bit more. And we'll start to see how it does. So with that, we are about at an hour, and we're going to end today with kind of a collection spotlight. I've got a piece I'll show. I don't know how well it'll translate with the camera, but it'll be just as much for the telling portion of a show and tell. So, look at this one. Yeah. So this is actually I'll show it first, I suppose.
Dun, dun, dun.
So this is painting for a Sega Genesis game. And actually, I probably need to do this. You guys can hear me and other things.
Yeah.
It is 688 attack sub for the Sega Genesis, painted by Nixon Galloway. And I had to kind of dig and figure this out, but it was actually the second ever video game box art painting that I purchased. So I'm probably going to take it down to describe a little bit, and then I'll maybe bring it back up if it makes sense. But kind of what I was thinking about when I chose this one is, a lot of pieces don't really have an interesting story behind them. You'll say, oh, I bought it from another collector. Oh, I bought it in Heritage. Oh, I bought it from the artist. And that there's not a lot there to tell, maybe, depending. So earlier in the episode, I said the first ever artwork that I purchased came from Dan in March 2018. And I was looking at when did I buy this one? And so I bought this in April 2019, so about a full year later. And, I had bought that first one, had no plan to collect, but I liked research. I liked poking around, seeing who were the artists who did this. And at that point, in that 2018, 2019 period, as I would research and find out some information, I'd be like, oh, look what I just learned. Oh, I'll go put it in the Facebook group. And I would just share. Yep. Oh, here, this is the artist for this. And I just discovered it here. I'm sharing it with the group. And this is an instance where the artist named Nixon Galloway. So he's now deceased, and he was deceased at the time that I found this. And he was an aviation artist. I believe he served in the Navy in World War II. And then afterward, took on a fine art career. So I don't know too much about his background, but this is an instance where, as I was going through my either Sega Genesis game collection or just looking at images online, if you look at the Sega Genesis box art for 688 attack sub, you can't see a signature. But if you look at the front of the instruction manual, down in the bottom corner, there's a signature Galloway. I think for the Mega Drive European releases, his Galloway signature is visible on the published boxes. But for the US releases, it's on the manual. So I said, oh, I wonder who this Galloway is. And it's a Galloway artist. And quickly, I found, it's Nixon Galloway. I found the same signature. It's the same artist. And then I saw he was deceased. And I said, well, okay, well, this is just good information. Probably nobody knows this. Let me share it with the Facebook group. I typed a little post. I was about to hit send. And I said, well, let me just Google a little bit more. And maybe it's second page of Google results, that kind of a thing. I found an art gallery in Montana, in Joliet, Montana. It's a gallery called the Meadowlark Gallery, and they specialize in Western fine art, sports art, that kind of a thing. You'll see some hunting images, some other images with those kinds of themes. And they had a few pieces from Nixon Galloway. And there were two different submarine pieces. And lo and behold, one of them is 688 attack sub. And I said, oh my God, there it is. And I'm thinking, oh, thank goodness I didn't just send that into the group. I mean, can I imagine if I'd shared that and Dan goes, oh, look at this. Hey, sir, do you have that painting for sale? I mean, I really would have been shooting myself in the foot, or maybe I wouldn't have cared, right? Because I hadn't really bought a lot of things at that point. I'd only made the other purchase, a year before. But all this is brand new to me, right? This is this is a real gallery that exists in Montana. They have an online side, but I wouldn't quite call it a storefront, right? And so nothing is priced. So all I have to go on is, the first piece of artwork that I've purchased from Dan. And I say, I have no idea what they're going to be asking. Is this $5,000? Is this $10,000? Like, what would this piece cost from this gallery? Because at that point I had very little perspective for artwork as a whole, not just video game artwork, but like, what is a really nice painted picture of a submarine sell for? And now with time, you kind of learn that the artist's name, it's how it looks, how big it is, what it was used, all these other factors that go into price. And there's lots of really beautiful artwork that's just not very expensive. But that takes time to understand. And even if I understood those pieces, the Western market, the sports art market, is completely different than the video game market in some ways, right? It's all illustration, there's commonalities, but I knew nothing what to expect. So I send an email to the gallery, and I almost didn't, but I said, well, there's no harm in asking what this is priced at. And to my pleasant surprise, they came back and said it was priced at $450, and I bought it, and I sent them a check. And it came to me. But it was probably because of being able to find something like that, and that it was very cheap, and that it was an unconventional way, that was exciting for me. Not just from a money perspective, but like, if I hadn't seen the signature and found that it was Nixon Galloway and happened to find this gallery in Montana and bought it, it wouldn't be very well known at all among video game collectors that this art still existed. It very well could have sold to anyone who just said, oh, it's a nice painting of a submarine. It's very well painted. I'll buy it and I have it on my wall. And no video game artwork collector would ever have seen or heard from it again. So I'll hold it up again. But I thought, as it came to show and tell kind of a piece, that this is one where there would be more tell to it. But it really, on the back, it's described as he worked in gouache. I've seen online he kind of worked in oils as well. I don't really know to my eye exactly what this one would be, but it was described as gouache. But it's very well rendered. It's very attractive. It's Sega Genesis. It's black box artwork. I'm very happy to have this. And then, this one for me kicked off needing to buy art materials for the first time, right? When Dan sent me a painting, he was kind enough to have already done the hard work for me, through and through, right? Sourcing it, but then taking care of it, right? So this is me kind of buying that, kind of a archival condition paperwork there. Not paperwork. What would you call it, Dan? I call it tracing paper.
Like the flyleaf or glassine.
That kind of a thing. And then, this is a Hansen black thick construction paper, kind of a top layer there. On the back, has Nixon Galloway artist, and this is, probably from you probably can't see it. It's not clear. Doesn't really matter, but it's, untitled Ship Sinking by Sub. Nixon Galloway, medium gouache, unframed.
I'd argue that's titled.
Yeah. Well, I think
it's definitely titled.
Titled courtesy of the Meadowlark Gallery.
There we go.
No, that's wonderful.
That was a great story.
Yeah, I thought it was
thanks, Sanford.
Cool that not a lot of pieces have kind of a story and a history to them. Maybe they all do in their own way, but I thought this was fun for me. The second ever piece that I purchased, and kind of looking at that timeline and when it was, and realizing that that was only 4.5 years ago. It seems like I've been interested in this material for a lot longer, but when you actually start looking at dates on calendars and when things happened, like Ibrahim, I know when you and I first started talking for the very first time, I remember it only because I just moved into this current house in August 2020. So I remember I got here and I couldn't find the tape to box up something I was sending you. And, in that August 2020, that was only 3 years ago, right? You start to put this stuff on a timeline, and it all it's been fun.
I was really
Time
taken
flies
with
when you're
the
collecting art.
yeah.
Sorry.
I was really taken with the time lag between the first and the second. I mean, I guess I must have known that at some time, but hearing you say that again was a surprise to me. Like I had lost track of the fact that there was that much time passed between your first and second purchase.
Yeah, and it wasn't, and I think at that point there wasn't necessarily a plan for a second purchase. I
Right.
said, "Oh, I'm going to buy one," and so then I just started doing the research and just trying to poke around and learn. But like, I wasn't ready to buy another piece per se. But I was interested, and so just through that research and reaching out process, discovered this one, and then it turns out the third piece I bought was in May 2019, right after this one. And maybe that'll be
he was hooked.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, maybe that'll be one to share for future story time. But it was interesting having made the first purchase and the second, how I went about having the discussion to purchase the third one. Just my own little development process there.
Sounds
Yeah.
to me like you're a smoldering ember, and now you've grown into a raging inferno.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to leave that one alone.
Yeah. So I might have shared this one in the Facebook group once, couple years ago. But I'll go ahead and, work on getting it up in OBGA and kind of adding a little bio there for Nixon Galloway. As far as I know, this is the only game piece he did. I think at some point I discovered which design firm had repped him at that time, or was repping him at the time. I think he was known mostly as an aviation artist, did other kind of war themed things. So I imagine it was, whether this piece was done specifically for the Sega Genesis or if it was painted for something else and then reused for this purpose, whether that scenario. But I could see it simply just being that with the 688 painted on there.
I was going to say that, yeah, because the 688 is right on the masthead of the sub.
So I imagine probably, right, they were just going through, looking for an artist. Said, "Oh, this guy does the kind of artwork that we want. We are going to select Nixon Galloway. Please come do this specific sub piece for our game." Is kind of how I imagine that process might have been, and accordingly, right, may not have done other video game artwork.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few guys that are just known for painting cars, and then they'll paint one or two car-related video games. They're known for, whatever it may be. That's a common one because metal is kind of a tricky thing to paint with sort of its own skill set and whatever. So you see some of that type of stuff. Vehicles vehicles are just, because a lot of the time you're painting figures. So when it comes to vehicles, it's all straight lines and reflections, and it's a little different than typical.
Yeah.
So, thanks for story time. That was good.
Yeah, wonderful.
So I think, as a concept, whether in each episode or future episodes, having this kind of a collection spotlight, OVGA show and tell, right? Whatever name we officially come up for it. Whether
like
for
that.
one of us or for guests that we have on, which I know, in our second episode, we did an interview with Sam Dyer from Bitmap Books. And I think in time we'll have other collectors on the podcast, showing some of their work, because some of that, being able to tell those stories of where things came from or how we got started, I think is interesting to me, learning about each of you guys, but also other collectors in this hobby. So I think with that, we can probably just about sign off. Last thoughts, anybody?
I'm just curious, before we sign off, I'm curious to hear from Coleman and Ibrahim as to, what the delay was with you guys between your first and second pieces, because I know on my end, there was like no delay. It was like, I got my first piece, I was hooked, I was looking for more. There was no waiting for a year. So I'd like to kick it to you guys to chime in.
You lead the way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I committed to buy Space Ace, before I went to pick it up, I already made another deal to buy something else. So
That's amazing.
yeah, like I paid for Space Ace, so that that's my first piece. Before I picked it up, I bought something else. Yeah, I was hooked. That's it. I was all in.
I think. Well, it took me a long time to hop on the horse, but then once I finally did, I think it was only like a couple of months. But what I really recall, like the most, was that my lady ended up getting COVID. So I was stuck at the house for a couple of weeks feeling good. And I just started hunting on the internet.
Oh.
Like I was just like, I can't go anywhere. I can't go to work. I can't do anything. Like I'm confined to this room. So I just started hunting and I found 2 paintings directly from the artist. I found this one and I found one other one, which I have not shared with the world. So maybe that'll be my show and tell one day. Ooh.
And that's a Golden Axe magazine piece behind you, is it,
That
Coleman?
is, yeah, it's for Sega
Power?
the Sega magazine, issue number 4 from 1990.
Very cool.
UK magazine. Yeah, it was quite cool. He actually ended up sending it to his son in the UK, who then Ibrahim went and picked it up.
I picked it up
directly from him for me.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So that was a cool.
I still don't
little...
understand why he didn't just send it to me. He sent it
I
to
don't
his
know.
son. I had to drive
Yeah.
like an hour. I'm like, just send it to me. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. It was what it was.
Yeah,
but
That's funny.
Yeah, I think it was a couple months.
And I'm still in shock, Ibrahim. With you doing all these local deals, like I wouldn't.
Well, no,
expect
he did a deal in my backyard.
Well, you mentioned also picking up. I think it was Space Ace locally,
Yeah,
and then you're picking up this and like, wow, because usually there's so much distance involved that there's not a lot of local deals. So, especially in the UK, then too.
yeah. No, it's always good to get a local deal, and you just don't know. It's like, oh my god, that was artwork can be so close to you. You just don't know. But yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
Well, with that,
awesome.
Shall we say au revoir?
Yeah.
All right, fellas. Thanks to everybody for listening. And remember,
Signing.
we've got the Original Video Game Art Collectors Facebook group, originalvideogameart.com. And any other plugs, guys?
Those are the main ones.
That's it.
That's the main ones.
Right.
All
See
right,
All right,
everyone.
everyone.
All right,
Take
everybody.
care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.